Hey, everybody, welcome back to the TEMSEA Leadership Podcast. My name is Eric Claus, and once again, I'm honored to be able to be your host. Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to share with everyone as a reminder to register for the TEMSEA Conference in mid-July. That information will be in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. I also wanted to share with all of you here, recently, the southeast part of the United States got hit by severe weather, and certainly Tennessee got hit very hard. Several counties were impacted by a large tornado. Unfortunately, even people have died and became severely injured as a result of that. But I wanted to send a message. Everyone here at TEMSEA and all the leaders across the state I know feel the same way. We wanted to thank the providers, the frontline providers and the volunteers for doing what you do, for adding value to people in time of need during this crisis. And we are so grateful. And in fact, a tragic event, but very inspiring to know that we are all involved in the community that serves others. So we wanted to thank you for that. Also wanted to share with you a happy EMS week. I know by the time you hear this, it will have been past, but we are truly grateful for everything that you do. You matter and you make a difference. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's about making connection with others.
So let's jump into this episode. I am so excited to be able to have this conversation and bring it to you from an individual that is no stranger to leadership. His name is Dr. Lee, and he is from Florida. And I want to read this to you. I have his CV in front of me. It's very, very long, but I know this is going to capture your attention as it did mine. Dr. Lee served in the United States Air Force Special Forces from 1970 to 1972 as a captain and as a flight surgeon. He has won the Bronze Star Award during that time. Dr. Lee is an accomplished physician, an emergency medicine physician. Some of the credentials and leadership positions he has held includes this: Chief Medical Officer, Chief of Emergency Medicine, Vice President of Medical Affairs, President and owner and medical director for several EMS and fire agencies. So I am so excited to be able to bring this conversation with you today from Dr. Lee. I know you're going to enjoy it, and welcome to the conversation. Dr. Lee, welcome to the TEMSEA podcast. We are so excited that you've joined us here today from Florida.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
Well, we are excited. I wanted to give everybody just sort of a blip of how we got to be here, how we got to be friends. It was recently during a webinar that I did, was invited by Dr. Tebby to speak at a group of you all. You were on the call in Florida about the leadership project that we're doing in Tennessee. And during the Q&A, Dr. Peter Tebby, for those listening to the podcast, he was featured. He sent me a text and said, "You have to have Dr. Lee on the podcast." And so we connected, and we've spent at least an hour, hour and a half on Zoom already talking before this call. And it was like, wow, I cannot wait to be able to bring this conversation to everybody. So that's a background a little bit about how we met. So anyway, welcome, and I'm fired up about the conversation.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Tebby was very gracious in doing that. I think I should thank him for it.
Or you can throw something at him a little bit later, like, why'd you set me up? So I know we're going to talk about some incredible things, but let's start this off a little non-traditional and laugh a little bit about something comical that has happened to you in your many years of experience with leadership.
Well, Eric, I actually, thought about this a little bit, and you'd give me a little bit of understanding what the questions might be. And this was actually a little bit of a tough one. Luckily I haven't had a lot of humorous issues during the leadership I've been involved with. However, and I don't know if I can do this quickly, but when I was in med school, I think my junior or senior year, I happened to get a fellowship in tropical medicine, and I went down and lived and worked in Panama. And there were two other, students with me at the time. And for one way or another, we actually got involved with the Air Force there, and we we literally talked them into letting us go through their jungle survival school. It was special operations. And so we went to jungle survival school. It's a week long. You jump out of a helicopter into the swamp, and they teach you how to, find water and, eat worms and all sorts of stuff. And then at the end, there's an escape and evasion piece. And they're a tribe of Indians that live along the Darien. They're called the Choco Indians. And they hire the Indians to come and get you the last 2 days. And so they team you up with another, with a teammate. They take you way out in the jungle, and then they tell you to find your way back to the camp. You've got about a day to do it, and without getting captured. And the Choco Indians got $1 for every hat that they got off of you. And the reputation was they got, they caught everything, and nobody got back with their hat. So I was determined with my partner to get back with my hat. And I'll speed forward. We actually got back with our hat. And so I want to bet with the instructor, and I have his name tag now, or his badge, from that bet. But anyway, zoom forward now 6 or 7 years. And this has with leadership. And I was thinking about, how you become a leader and so on. And, there's a thing called positional leadership. And that is that you get a title and suddenly you're in a position that requires leadership and positional leadership. And so that now zoom forward, and I was in the Air Force, and I was scheduled to go over to Southeast Asia. And when you go over the jungle, well, then they make you go through jungle survival school. So as luck would have it, I was sent down to Panama to go through jungle survival school to prepare myself, for going to Southeast Asia. And now imagine this, when you graduate from, I went to flight surgeon school, and when you go in I got out of med school, my internship, and I literally went right in the Air Force, and overnight I was a captain. And so now I didn't even know how to put my bars on. And some airman actually told me one day walking down the street, I had my bars on wrong. But anyway, suddenly you're a captain. I mean, it's pretty quick, and and so I go down to jungle survival school, and there are about 30 people in the class. Now, these are all officers and airmen getting ready to go to Southeast Asia. There are no students in this class. So they do a prep day, and they tell you, and so they divide you into groups of 10s. And they said, we're going to have a leader for each group. And they said the easiest way to do that is to have the ranking officers be the leaders of the group. And as luck would have it, I was a ranking officer. So you could see people rolling their eyes and, going, oh my God, what's this about? And so at any rate, they take us off, same routine. I had a group of 10. We jumped into the, swamp, swam through that. And so as we're going further and further out, and they gave me a radio so that I could call for help if we got in trouble. I mean, nobody ever used the radio. So this is the part that is kind of funny about, being anointed a leader, very quickly when you got no leadership skills or experience or whatever. But literally, I got us lost. And we got to a point where we couldn't go forward, we couldn't go backwards, really thick underbrush and whatever, and we're trapped. And you could see everybody's kind of upset, And I thought for a moment, I came within an instant of calling the helicopter to back us out. Which was going to be, I don't know if they'd ever done that before. But at any rate, luckily there were a few guys more than I did. And we actually managed to get out. However, the Choco Indians captured the whole crew, in mass, by the way, I might say, not just one at a time. And so that was my, I think, first leadership role. And it wasn't funny at the time. I was embarrassed. And I actually went into it because I'd been through it before thinking, I know some stuff here. But it didn't turn out to be true. It taught me some lessons. So in retrospect, it's funny. It wasn't funny at the time. That's my story, Eric.
Okay. I love it, which is going to be a great segue to lead in to the conversation that we're going to be having, at least early on. At what point did you realize you went from positional leadership to, wow, I'm a leader and I am influencing others? Do you remember that experience?
Yes, I think that on the first level, I had to think everything, my whole life revolved around being in the military just for a few years. But when I went overseas, I was in special ops, and I didn't go to Vietnam. I volunteered for a assignment in Laos, and I was in, it was an all volunteer group. We were not legal in Laos at the time. And I volunteer now. I have my bars. I'm a flight surgeon. Everywhere you have pilots, you have to have a flight surgeon. So we had a number of airstrips in Laos. We all had, now you can tell it, but at the time we all had fake IDs. We didn't wear uniforms. And I lived up in a village in northern Laos with the Hmong tribe. Suddenly, and because we had, I think, as I recall, it was 9 airstrips in Laos. And at each airstrip, I had what you would think of as a paramedic, maybe a physician assistant today. And many of them had been there for a while. So, and I was in charge of those folks. Now, frankly, I didn't have a clue what that meant, but suddenly I was saddled with that responsibility, if you will. And even though they were very autonomous for the most part, but I was saddled with that responsibility. And I was also asked to make changes and to improve stuff for the Laotian Air Force and so on. And so suddenly, I was having to make change. And I think leadership is about making change. And that's the first time. When I was in high school, in college, I never ran for office. I played football, I did sports, and I did all this stuff. But I wasn't political at all. When I say political, I never was at the front of anything. I always participated, but I wasn't at the front of anything. So that was the first time that suddenly I had responsibility and that I had to make something happen. So I think to answer your question, it was probably there. I think when I came back in Florida in terms of emergency medicine, it was someplace else.
Yeah, was the experience there, were there some things that you learned or witnessed that really impacted, how you were as a young man and how you kind of used those experiences to influence your leadership?
I think, first of all, it gave me a ground that has never gone away. It turned out to be, it was what you'd call a yay boo. I made some friends there. I had some close friends in the tribe and then also with the pilots and the others. But what I did see was, the CIA was running the show and I saw leadership there. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I saw good and bad leadership. I had our government leadership, and I saw, and I came under their guidance, if you will. And then I saw the local leadership, the tribal chief who was being paid by our country to help fight the war there. And then I saw local leader and others. I saw good and bad leadership, number one. And I saw also that trying to get things done was not as easy as snapping your finger, even though you were in charge. I was sometimes bewildered by wanting to do things and that I'd go to my boss and my boss couldn't just make it happen overnight. So it taught me it wasn't that easy just because you had the authority or the badge or the rank, And I also saw good and bad leadership. I was thinking about leadership. When you say leadership, you sort of naturally think of good stuff. It seems like a good term. And yet if you look and you think about Hitler was a leader, he was a leader and he had a lot of power and he had a lot of charisma. And I don't even like saying his name, but there is good and bad leadership. And so I did sort of begin to think about how I wanted to play the game and what I wanted to be like, and I did understand that there were going to be a lot of obstacles from time to time that didn't happen overnight. And I was as green as you can be. I don't mean just in the military, I mean in life. And so I just didn't know this at that point in time. And that stuck home with me. Persistence was a big deal, I think.
That's incredible lessons with that you're right. It's such a challenge to be a leader. And there are a lot of bad role models with leadership if we're just being transparent. I want to go back. There is one part of the conversation that we had pre-interview, if I remember correctly, that when you went to med school, when you were a physician, it was a career that wasn't, I guess, highly looked at as someone of influence. And do I remember the story correctly that someone asked you, when are you going to get a real job? And you were a physician?
Well, it wasn't about, you're close.
Okay.
It was about being a physician. I never really could pin down what I wanted to do in med school.
Okay.
And so I went into Berry plan, meaning that I went into the Air Force after my internship because I didn't know what kind of a residency I wanted to do. And so they make an agreement with you that, lets you stand. When I got out, that experience affected me, and I came back and all I wanted to do was get to the ocean. I had never had gotten to the ocean. I'm a water guy, and I wanted to get to the ocean. And so emergency medicine wasn't emergency medicine then. The ERs were all covered by moonlighters. I was in Florida, northern Florida, and I came down to get a license. And as luck would have it, there was one hospital, Margate, it's in Broward County here, that was they wanted to convert their moonlighters to full-time physicians in the emergency room. And so I said, well, I'll take that because all I wanted to do was have enough money to pay the rent and go scuba diving and skiing. Now, with that said, you have to imagine my parents and, getting through school and all this. And suddenly, everybody is wringing their hands. Like, my gosh, you're throwing away your career. And then I had many patients that came in that thought I was doing some sort of community service, because they're arrested for something. And so those were the ones that were asking me, and it was they meant it as a compliment. They would say, "How much longer do you have to do?" I'm not sure, but it was working out at the time. I was getting a lot of scuba diving, a lot of skiing in, and that was very early, and we were very low on the totem pole in the ER at that point in time. We had no identity among the general staff.
That was captivated by that story. Obviously, things have changed over the years. And now look at emergency medicine. It's certainly highly recognized and an important part of the team. And I wanted to ask you, with your experience, Dr. Lee, how has your leadership approach evolved over the years with your experience?
I think the basics, arrived with time, and that was a certain amount of discipline. I think leadership involves hard work. You can't take leadership positions and not work hard. I think that, for me, I was always a reader. So I was watching General Mattis the other day, and he has a thing on leadership, and he said that, you can't lead if you don't read. And he actually told me something. He didn't tell me. He said something else. He said he was a Marine, but as you go up the officer's rank, I didn't know this. I don't think that was true for me, but they give you a list of books to read. And then when you get promoted to the next level, they give you another list of books. I don't think they give you a test, but it's recommended and it's how to evolve your career. So I had some of those things going on. I think it's kind of funny because I very quickly became a manager. I had the contract at several hospitals, and so I was hiring other physicians. So not only was I working, but I was also, trying to make the ER perform, like I thought it was supposed to. And in the beginning, I thought I hate to say it, but I thought it for a long time. I thought that as a leader, when things didn't go right, there was a screw up, that my job was to find the guilty party and to have them confess, Sure. And swear to me that they would never do it again. Now that wasn't somebody taught me, I read about this one time and a light went off, and they taught me about the prudent man theory or the rational man theory. And I like this a lot, and it changed a lot the way I do things. And that is that, when you're trying to coach people to do same different, if you came to me and said, Wayne, you need to do this differently or whatever, I will tell you, I will be a little bit defensive. I just can't help it. And I might want to make excuses or debate it, and make sure you have the whole story, whatever. So it doesn't work very well. And so what happens is most people that you're dealing with are rational, or they're prudent. They want to keep their jobs, but rational, meaning that if you say stuff to them makes sense, they may not buy into it right away, but if you say, listen, Mrs. Smith said, you were a jerk, and maybe you say Miss Smith was a jerk. I don't know. I don't have a video, so I don't know. But at the same time, you say, well, I don't know what happened, but just in the future, consider this, think about this. Don't try to get, acknowledgement of right or wrong. But the average person left to their own devices, when that occasion occurs again, they will think about that conversation, and they will say, maybe I ought to, do this a little differently than I did it last time. So that's called a rational man theory. So I swung over to that. And that was a big difference for me after a few years in the business, so to speak. The other thing too, in the very early days, and this had to do with perfection and excellence, but in the very early days, I was nervous. I came out of the military and I hadn't been trained, and I was working in the emergency room. We'd have cardiac arrest and trauma, and everybody, of course, would gather up, and I was. I wanted everybody to perform perfectly, and I put a lot of pressure on. It took me a while, but I began to realize after a while that the pressure I was putting on people was making our performance worse rather than better. Because when people would come to the table, they were so intimidated, and intimidation is a big issue in medicine, areas in medicine. But they were so intimidated they could hardly function because of that. And I always had what you might call a strong personality with the paramedics. I think most of the folks knew that I was always driving, for the patient. But at the same time, I did that a little bit differently. But that was important. I learned that. That was just experience. So those are things that I changed my MO, so to speak, with time.
There's a lot to unpack there. I wanted to. Yeah, in a good way. I want to talk to you about a couple of these things. I wanted to make a comment, though. You had said that you can't lead if you don't read, and I'll share my experience with you. I was a medic on the truck, and it was probably the mid '90s. I picked up my first leadership book, and I hated to read. By the way, I wasn't a good reader in school. And I struggled, but I saw this book in the store and I picked it up, and it was funny. Somebody that I was with was like, why are you buying that? You don't even read. I was like, the book looked cool. It was a great cover. So I picked it up and I read it, and that was my first realization of there was a different way. And then since then, I'm an avid, reader, but, mostly by audio and podcast, of course. And you're right. It completely changed the way that I approach and think. And it's almost like I have to do that now to be able to feel like I can handle the challenges that are coming my way because they're different and they're unique. But I just wanted to emphasize on how big of a deal that statement is for all of the people that are inspiring to be a leader or wanting to know about the influence they have. It's very, very important to read and to learn from others. So I'm grateful for that. I want to go back to your statement.
Can I make one comment?
Of course, please.
But with regard to that, I just want to make sure that, to clarify that, I think there's a lot of stuff written about leadership. And frankly, a lot of it's kind of boring, and not everybody wants to read it. I think what I want to make clear is that it's about reading everything. I don't mean reading everything, but reading all types of things. Because at the end of the day, it's about making connection with others, about being able to talk to people, being able to relate to others in different ways about different topics, Because one thing, we talk about leadership. A friend of mine is a PhD at FAU here in Florida, and she teaches leadership. And I was talking to her about this, and I want to give her the credit. I think she got it from a book too. But she talked about followership. And, when you have a lot of people around you that are smart as you are, maybe more experienced, and you're trying to get them to follow you, it's really important that they can relate to you, that you cultivate those relationships. And I think you do it in a variety of ways. One is your knowledge base, that you're not a one-trick pony in terms of what you talk about, and so I think reading, and I think there are other things. I think reading is one piece of it, but I think reading, I like what Mattis says, you can't lead if you don't read, and so that's just important, but I think it's reading a lot of stuff.
Yeah, wow, that I love that. It's a great point, being diverse, and I love to do that, especially in the podcast world, not just listen to specific things about emergency medicine, to be able to be diverse and to be able to learn from individuals. You had mentioned something, and the question is, I know you've managed large groups of very skillful individuals, successful individuals. I know it can be challenging, but this ties into your comment about there's a lot of intimidation in medicine. So specifically, the question that I'm curious about is, so let's say that, you have managed hundreds of physicians and high performers. That's challenging, but when you're looking at the intimidation factor, when the personalities are dominant, how challenging was that? And what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you could share with us about that type of environment? In EMS providers, nursing, I think we're all defensive individuals. We know what we're doing. We're very confident. But can you elaborate a little bit more about the intimidation part in medicine and what we can learn from that?
Well, it's funny. The answer, there is a lot of intimidation. And particularly when you're surrounded by people, that you're in a leadership role, let's say, and you're surrounded by people that are as smart or smarter and maybe more experienced than you are. So at one time, I think we had 400 physicians. I was the chief medical officer. And we're all trying to, get them to do certain things, in a certain way, whatever. And not clinically, but, how, and so on and so forth. So, and all of these folks are very talented, very skilled, experienced, et cetera. And not everybody agrees. And I will tell you, I think this is where, you may mention it, but I love the Teddy Roosevelt man in the arena thing. And that's exactly where this applies. If you're in a leadership role, I frankly think, and I hate to use the word courage, but I think it takes a certain amount of personal fortitude to withstand the criticism, the different opinions. You have a vision, and you're trying to, leadership is really just about power, and power being defined as making change. Okay, the ability to make change, and so you have a vision, you're trying to make change, and yet you have people that don't always agree with you. They don't like the way you're doing it. They think you're doing it badly. All sorts of stuff. I will tell you, I laugh now because I have a very thick skin, I say, and I developed that over time because there's a lot of resistance to change, many times. But at the same time, it's not a reason. That's what the Man in the Arena is about. It's not a reason to avoid stepping into leadership. It's about the premise of what Teddy Roosevelt wrote there is that it's better to be in the game and have failed than not to have tried at all. But be prepared for what's going to come at you when you have, a lot of people that are as competent or more competent than you are. So I experienced that, I think, a lot. And it was for whatever reason, I think it was probably a lot of mine was positional leadership. There's another thing called situational or emergent leadership. And that has to do with crisis management. You find yourself in a lifeboat with 10 people, and there's a lot of chaos going on and confusion, et cetera. And somebody steps forward out of need, to calm things down, to put things in order and take over. So that it's not always just because you have the title. Sometimes it's because there's a need and somebody has to stand up and take control. And, some people do that better than others. And so, that's sort of my experience. And it is very, very challenging when you have your peers around you. I can remember giving different talks to people and standing up in front of, 100 ER physicians, or other physicians, especially now you're outside your arena, neurosurgeons and others, and talk about these things, it is very intimidating, And so at any rate, I think the point is that it's better to be in the game. I think that's where followership comes in. I think it's very important that, there's a saying that people will participate, they will help in things that they help create. So in as much as you can get people to help you create stuff, they will participate in that much better than if you don't get them to help you. And that's where inclusive leadership comes in, that you have to pull people in with you. Let me give you, this is real corny, but I have a poem I read years ago. It's a short poem, but it says, heretic rebel, a thing to flout. He drew a circle that shut us out. So he's on the outside, resisting. But God and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. And I think that's about strategy. You'll find a lot of people that carve you out, that don't want to get into your circle, And so the strategy is to develop a method to bring them into your circle, so that they're part of the team rather than outside the team. Enough of the poetry.
I feel like this could go on for hours. Like I'm taking notes as we're going through this, and so many key nuggets. The one that is on my mind right now that I really wanted to encourage some of the younger leaders or the leaders that are listening to this. How do you handle criticism? And you had mentioned that in the positions that you're in, leading high performers, did criticism affect you, and how can we use that? Give us some advice with when we get criticism. By the way, and everybody knows I'm just exposing it on behalf of the people that are listening. Criticism is terrible. I mean, we think about it, but give us some nuggets of what you've learned, because I know you've been criticized over the years.
First of all, let me just be clear. I don't handle it very well.
Okay. Thank you for being honest, because I think you're speaking like we're all that way.
I don't handle it very well. I have learned, and this comes into the listening category, I have learned to think about other people's perspective and to listen closely to what they're saying. I'm not a natural listener, but I have taught myself to do better at it, to listen closely. But I think criticism is I've always thought like patient complaints is a form of criticism. I always thought that that's where the gold was, And, many times I'd have to deliver complaints to other physicians from patients and so on, and administrators and maybe from fire chiefs to others, whatever. But I think that's where the gold is. And I mean by that's if you take that and listen to it and think about how to, address that, do that better in a constructive way, then, there's a payoff for it. There's a payoff for it. I think the trick is hearing it, and not to just go ixnay, right away, and to hear it out. But it's difficult. I think it's difficult for all of us. And I think that's where, frankly, where the prudent man theory comes in. If you're approaching people with a criticism, that you try not to get a confession out of them, and a promise never to do it again. So because it's just so hard to overcome that natural tendency for all of us. But I think that if we listen to the criticism, it helps us grow. And I have to tell you, it's work. I'm not a natural at accepting criticism, but at the same time, in the jobs I've had and in the roles I've had, you're right. I've had a lot of criticism, and it's hard sometimes to keep your eye on the ball. But it makes you double check yourself, think about what you're doing, think about what you're selling, And so I see it as a tool, as a useful affair. But you have to get over that first response.
Yeah, it's necessary to get that. I love your point, because that was a question I was going to ask you about listening. And in my leadership journey, that has made such an impact on me. Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about that in listening. And instead of reacting when you're approaching a challenging situation, going into it, trying to seek understanding, because oftentimes we don't have to clean up our mess because we're going into it not assuming. And that's deadly, I think, for a leader, is to be assuming that you know the answer and you have hard discipline skills or reactions to someone, and you truly don't know the intent behind it. So that is a very, very good, very
Can
good.
I make a point with it?
Yes, please.
There's a subset of that is about listening. And this is about, again, I like the concept of followership, and getting people, to team up with you. But, and again, I wasn't a natural at this, but I've trained myself to be better at it. But my point is that when I meet, and I'm naturally curious about people, but I'm always trying to find the connection. So my point is that you've probably experienced that you've been with people where you've gone through the evening or something, and the conversation, they never ask you, or whoever's with you, you never ask you about yourself or what you're interested in or whatever. It's one-sided, And so I've tried to do this much better, almost aggressively, in that I dig down into people. I want to know their story. I want to find what our common ground is, And so that's it's an asking and a listening skill, And of course, people like to talk about themselves. So I think that people are happy that you're asking, But you can find common ground there. You can develop. They'll like you better, and likability is a big deal. If you're listening to them and asking about their well-being and what's going on in their life, what are their interests, what are their hobbies, etc. And so that turns out to be very valuable. Now you have an ally, that helps you if you want to get down the road further.
I don't want to lose what you just said, because I think you do that naturally. I think I try to intentionally do that, but it's not common practice where people will ask questions about, hey, tell me about you. Most of the time it's disconnected, but that is such a powerful tip for anyone that's listening to this in any position. Is sometimes they don't even know anything about you. They leave the conversation and think you hung the moon. They're like, oh my gosh, Dr. Lee is such a great guy, but I don't know anything about him because all he did was ask about me. It's very powerful to show that interest. And man, what an incredible nugget on that. Let's talk about your followership that you had mentioned. And I'll start with this, is looking in my years of experience as I evolved, is that in the very beginning of my journey, I probably wasn't a very good follower. But now that I'm in a leadership position, I am a much better follower now than I was years ago. But I understand that I have to be a follower sometimes, but I have to be a leader sometimes, and the two coexist. And do you think that you were a good follower in the beginning of your career, or do you think that has changed the more you've developed with your leadership skills?
And I always joke about this. I did a lot of expert depositions, and the attorneys always taught me to say it depends. And so my answer to that is it depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it may have had to do with what I thought of that leader. It may have had to do with his vision. It may have had to do with his allowing me to participate in it, that I had a role in it, So just delivering instructions to me was not, I wasn't, I didn't like that necessarily.
Sure.
So I think it depends a lot on what the vision is. I think it depends on whether and this is inclusive leadership, whether you feel like you're a part of the team. I don't think I always cared that I was at the front of the bus, so to speak, that I was leading the crew, but I did care that I had a role, to play. And so I think that's the way I saw it. I like I said, but I'm sure there were times when I didn't like what, was, I'm not sure if it was like what was being said so much as maybe I didn't like the person. It's not somebody I wanted to follow. And for all these reasons we talked about,
Definitely. Okay. So if you were to go back years ago, you're starting your leadership journey, what advice would you give someone that is just starting out? A couple of key nuggets as they pursue leadership and gain influence? Is there anything that you would coach the individuals who's just entering the field of leadership?
I don't think there are any magic bullets here. Okay. I mean, I think they're all stuff that, and I'll tell you what I think they are. I think that, as I've said, I think it requires a certain amount of discipline. And so I'm going to go over this is not rocket science. It's about hard work. First of all, I think it's important that it's a lot easier if you have a passion about what you're doing, okay? Now, you may be put in a position as a leader, and that where you're in that position to lead, but you really don't have a passion for it. I think that can be problematic, But at the same time, I think if you have to lead, I think the first thing is set a good example, and that, other people. Right now, we have a number of paramedics that I say we, I work for the Seminole Tribe, and I deal with a lot of paramedics still. I'm, for the most part, except for that, I'm retired. But and I see the folks that seem to have a passion. This is what they want to keep going up the ladder, so to speak. They want to get into leadership positions. So the trick is work hard. I think it's show up early. And I have to say, I don't think that's a strength in the fire service. But I think show up early, be on time, stay late. I think volunteerism is a big deal. I think volunteering to take on extra jobs, that's very important. I think the other thing is expand your horizons. And by that, I mean, and I already talked about READ. So READ's big on the list. So that's on the list too. But the other thing about expand your horizons is that, and I was lucky in a way. I came out, I'm a physician in town. The only people I knew were the people in the ER with me. I knew the surgeons and the neurosurgeon, the orthopedist, but they didn't hang out with us in those days, But the thing that really helped me a lot is I actually ended up getting involved in other things like United Way. And I was asked to present to a leadership Broward class. It's 50 people from the community, and every day of the month, one day a month, they have a leadership class. There are many models like this across the country. And I had to present there, and one day on the healthcare day, and I said, who are these guys and girls? And so I actually ended up saying I want to be in that. And so I went to the next class, which was class 6 in this area. And suddenly I was surrounded by 49 other people that had nothing to do with medicine, that became close friends. I got involved in that for many years. And so I think my point is that there are a lot of organizations, whether it's the Humane Society or, Children's Care, a variety of things. But get outside of your routine. Get involved with other organizations. And I will tell you, over time, the payoff on that is tremendous. And people, you can cross-pollinate with others, that gives you leadership capability. You know who to talk to, who to call, how to get things done. It's not easy if you stay in your little silo. So I would say volunteer locally for your jobs and also go outside with other organizations. Read, be disciplined. Set example is a big thing. I think mentoring, make sure if you can teach others that around you or below you how to do something correctly, that's a big thing. And I think shining on light, not taking the credit, but giving the credit is a big deal. So people, you may be in a leadership role, but shining the light on all those around you and giving them the credit, I think is all of those are important ideas, I think. It's multifactorial, obviously.
Yeah. Wow. Man, there's so many things that I wrote down about that. And I know I cannot even believe we're coming up on the hour so quickly. Let's talk about mentoring in your career. When did you discover that was an important part of your growth? And how's it impacted you?
I think the thing where it came up is there were a number of medics over the years that came to me and said, I'd like to go to med school. And by the way, I don't think, going to med school is the end all be all, but that's what they came to me for, is could I help them and guide them? And so that I think, and that was sort of after they had already, achieved, probably a lot of success without me. But I think it was really about, people asking for help and you could see who would be receptive. But I think a number of folks came in the paramedic arena. The most commonplace was, what do you advise about going to med school? And I had opinions about specialties. It was best. I thought emergency medicine, I always thought it was by far the best. The other thing that happened, though, in the same way was in the physician arena, with our docs. And so that, I was in a position where I participated in making decisions about who the next medical director was going to be, or who the next assistant medical director, who the next chairman of education was going to be, And so that I would have people come to me that had been working for, many years, and they said, I'd like to go up the ladder. And frankly, what they were saying is, I'd like to do less clinical work and more administrative work. And which was fine. That's fine. That's what I did too. And so that was fine. But they hadn't done anything. They didn't have a curriculum vitae. They didn't have, anything to help me move them along. So in as much as there was still time to do that, I always encouraged them and tried to grease the skids for them with involvement in other stuff where they could show their stuff. And I would help them, but much of that was guidance in terms of what you have to do to get into these seats. It's not just because you're the nicest ER doc, and sometimes maybe, but at any rate, so I think, I would help young physicians, do that. Many young physicians came in, they didn't know how to negotiate the contracts and how to set their work schedule up and make the deal. So I always tried to help in that regard. But that wasn't really about leadership so much. I think the main thing was about the docs that would come and want to go up the ladder. And if they were early on, it was easier to help them if they came, after 20 years in the ER and they'd never been on a committee, and or never had anything outside of, just going to work. And so, I tried to help there in terms of guidance. I'm not sure how that was.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think the message or the lesson that I got out of that is, the things that you do outside of what your normal responsibilities are going to prepare you for next level of leadership. And, the things that you had said, the discipline, the passion, setting a good example, work hard, read, all of those things contribute to the success. As you're still leading. You never arrive at, we always have an opportunity to get better. And I'm so thankful that you spent the time with us today. I know we're close to being end on time, but I wanted to ask you before we leave, you said you have a love of water and you're there in Florida. Tell me about the picture that is on your backdrop. Is that your boat? Do you spend time sailing?
That is my boat, and we could spend another hour. My boat is it's over 50 years old. I think it's 55 years old. And it was made by a famous builder, and it's a classic design, etc. And I bought it probably 35 or 40 years ago. I'd already been a boater before then, but this boat I've gone a lot of places with it. I'm getting ready to actually this weekend, I'm going to go down the Keys on it. And it's provided a lot of fun. It's actually taught me a lot of lessons, that I think apply to life, do it right the first time. Every time I don't go the extra step on the boat, I pay a price. And I don't tie it up right, or I get too lazy in terms of taking down the sails when there's a little rainstorm approaching. It's taught me a lot of stuff about, do it right, a certain amount of organization, thinking ahead, a little pre-planning, whatever. But I've always been a water guy, but that boat has helped me a lot and has provided a lot of hours of fun and excitement and challenges. Actually, I've had some really bad days on it and scary events. So I think it all helps, in terms of who you ultimately, become. And one thing I want to say, I made a comment that was a little bit negative about the fire service not being on time. So I'm sure I'll get beat up over that. But my point is that I think that's true. I think that's true everywhere, actually. But I think being on time is a big deal. And when you're playing in this arena, if you want to get in the arena. So nobody likes waiting for somebody that's, casual about it. So I don't want to be unfair to the fire service. I think it's but I didn't know if you want to beat me up.
We are not going to beat you up because I think sometimes we have to go down to the truth, and you're sharing your experience with us about that. And Dr. Lee, we sincerely appreciate you taking time with us today. I can't believe our hour is almost up, but really a sincere thank you for everything that you've done for the community, everything that you've done for this industry. And you've certainly added a lot of value to all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Eric, thank you. This has been certainly very flattering. Not to be falsely humble, but I still can't put that title on my head yet. Like you said, it's a work in progress. But I thank so much for you listening to me, and hopefully somehow it's helped along the line.
Well, it is. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I know this conversation added incredible value to you. It was such a thrill to be able to actually conduct that interview with Dr. Lee. Don't forget to register for the conference. We hope to see you there. And remember, the most important person that you will ever lead is you. And we will see you again soon.